are so glad We're so glad to have you with us. My name is Holly Ixon, and I'm with the Early Learning Team at the Hunt Institute. For the benefit of anyone who may be joining us for the first time today, the Hunt Institute is the creation of our founder and namesake, four-term North Carolina Governor James Hunt. We serve as an educational policy support to governors, state legislators, and other high-level state elected leaders. We cover the full spectrum of education policy, from early childhood through the workforce. Before we begin, I want to go over a few housekeeping items. Later in the hour, we will share some of your questions with the panel. If you would like to contribute a question, please use the question and answer function, the Q&A function, in the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Also, please know that today's session is closed caption. You can access those settings at the bottom of your screen as well. Finally, you will also be able to find the recording of today's webinar on our YouTube channel within the next few days. Just go to YouTube and search for the Hunt Institute Early Efforts webinar series. In our Early Efforts series, we focus on early childhood and the portion of the educational continuum. The phrase family as first teacher is often listed as a value or a part of a mission statement for organizations, but how is this shown as an action statement? In August 2024, Head Start's revised performance standards were issued, and family engagement is a core part of those revisions of the Head Start model. Head Start defines family engagement as a collaborative, strengths-based process through which early childhood professionals, families, and children build positive and purposeful relationships. It is a shared responsibility of families and educators at all levels that requires mutual respect for the roles and strengths each has to offer. This webinar will bring leaders from Head Start, Educare, and the National Association for Families and School Engagement together to discuss different research models of family engagement and how they are implemented. Today we have with us Portia Kennel, consultant for Thriving Families and Thriving Children and co-founder of Educare. Terry David, CEO of Families and Communities Rising, Durham, North Carolina's Head Start, one of our Head Start communities, and Reina Hernandez, Senior Director of Research and Policy with the National Association for Family, School, and Community Engagement. So I'm going to start off our questions today and direct the first question towards Portia. Portia, welcome.
Thank you.
Two of Educare's 5 public policy priorities are focused on families. Educare also lists family leadership as a core component of your model. What are some of the foundational best practices Educare uses to support family as a first teacher?
Thank you, Holly, for this opportunity, and thank you to the Hunt Institute. This is a very complicated, long conversation. I'm going to try to be as succinct. You'll probably hear the bell going off because I'm sure I'm going to go over time. Listen, I have asked the Hunt Institute staff to put in the chat box some links to resources to learn more about Educare schools, to learn more about family engagement and other resources that I have used in my learning journey to embrace genuine family engagement. And also I have them put in a link to the 5 policies. Believe me too, when I tell you that those policies were dedicated and developed by participation of families within the Educare Learning Network. So for those of you who are not familiar with Educare, Educare is a comprehensive early childhood and care program. At our heart is Head Start. We build upon Head Start and we build on a platform of research and data and policy and program practice and services, because we know that we have to not just do well inside the walls of our early childhood center-based programs, we've got to live outside the wall and things that are happening in research and policy and in the community impact everything we do. So Currently, there are 25 Educare schools serving over 4,000 children across the country. So that's what Educare is, a comprehensive center-based program for infants, toddlers, and young children to prepare them for entrance in kindergarten and for hopefully for a successful school trajectory throughout beyond their Educare experience. So that's what it is. Now let's talk about family engagement. The Educare model has 4 components, and one of the major components is intensive family engagement. And within that component, which aligns with the Head Start expectations and requirements, within that component is 2 that I'm going to talk about today. One is parent as nurturer and educator, primary nurturer and educator of their children. And the second is parent as leader and advocate, not only for their child, but for early education quality in their communities and in our schools. So those are the 2 major components I'm going to talk about today. Now, Educare, along with other programs, you're going to hear from one of them today from Terry. We're not putting ourselves out there as the expert and the know-all about this. But what we do say is that we have a framework built on a set of principles that will help to guide the activities, practices, and strategies you need to have in order to be and help support parents as the first educators, nurturers, and advocates for their children. The first of those principles is there's no such thing as a child alone. There's only a child in the context of family and community. In order for our educational interventions to be successful, and I'm trying to talk fast, we have to have an understanding of the cultural context and other issues in which children reside. And guess what? That's families. So that's why we have to invest in both the child and the family if our educational intervention is going to be successful. The second principle is what I call what we do is just as important as how we do it. The how. Educare programs, as well as other programs, is focused on the how. And I'm going to talk about the what and the how in more detail later in this workshop. But what I say to people, one of the principles is how we are is as important as what we do. Because, stay with me now, parents will forget what you do, and parents may forget what you said. But parents will never forget how you treated them in your program, your strategy, your policy, whatever you're doing in collaboration with families. The how is just as important as the what. And sometimes we as professionals have been trained to focus on the what, and we forgot the how, and parents have tuned us out. The other revelation that we're in right now, and I consider myself a reformed professional, is that we now know to face the challenges in the early Head Start systems and field that we've got right now, we have to have more tables, more chairs at our table. And those chairs have to be filled with parents. We've gone as far as we can go without. We've been reformed, but we got a long way to go. We have to systematically sustain parent engagement, participation, and leadership at every level and within every aspect of our programs, services, policies, and research and evaluation. We have to have parents at the table and sustain that involvement, integrated within our programs, services, and policy efforts, and what we're thinking about in terms of data collection and the research findings. They have to be there. If they are not there, our educational interventions, no matter how research-based and evidence-based they are, will not be sustained over time. The sustainers of our interventions is to not only invest in the child, but invest in the parent, who is the long-term keeper of any educational success that we have. So that's the two principles. I can talk more later about the framework of what we do, but we have to undergird ourselves and change our mindset as professionals to understanding that partnership with parents, the how is very important. How parents feel when they're in relationship and in partnership with you matters. It matters just as much as what we do. We've got to see families as having vital information to the success of our educational interventions. They don't have the same information that we have as professionals, but they have the vital and most vital information, which they're the expert, which means they're the expert on their own child, their own family, and their own community, and what the needs are. Or as some people say, those closest to the challenges are closest to the solutions. So we got to keep parents close to us so that our child interventions and education have a powerful long-term effect. So that's how I'm going to start this off, and I'll turn it back over to Holly.
Portia, thank you so much. It is always a lesson in learning for when you speak. Thank you very, very much. So I'm going to pose our next question to Terry. In August, the Office of Head Start released new performance standards. How do these revised standards uplift families, and what does it look like in your early Head Start and Head Start programs in Durham?
Holly, thank you so much for your question, and thank you for this opportunity to participate with the Hunt Institute. And so I'd say I like to just preface the question by talking a little bit about my personal background, and just say that it's a pleasure to be on the call because I'm a former participant in the Head Start Early Head Start program. My personal story is that I went to Head Start as a kid, right? I grew up in poverty. My mom and dad had 18 kids. I happened to be the 17th of 18. I have a twin sister. But so when the Head Start performance standards changed, it actually affected 5 areas. But I'll be more specific about the 2 areas you're asking about, the area you're asking about. One key area was family and community engagement. So these revised standards um, enhance family engagement services, such as presenting support and resources for pregnant moms and individuals. Also, the program required Head Start grantees to more effectively address and access community-specific needs for parents. Also, another area was mental health integration, where programs are now required to incorporate more mental health services across all areas, supporting both the well-being of children and families. And there was also an increased focus on child health and safety guidelines, just strengthening these policies to prioritize child safety and health, including how we report, any incidents regarding children. Um, and there's one more. I know you didn't ask this question, but I just want to add on to that, and hopefully I get to address later. And that is, um, I believe the one thing that separates Head Start or Early Head Start from any other early education program is, how we holistically care for families and have a family-centered approach. When I think about comprehensive services, where we focus on the whole child, and then the family support that are offered to families to promote family stability, to emphasize family engagement, because we believe that is the chief cornerstone to children's success during this early education period. um, and I'm going to give you some time back, but I'm hoping I get to come back and talk more specifically about how this focus on families really helps to support and enhance and improve family engagement while children and families are enrolled in Head Start and Early Head Start. And I say children and families because we don't just enroll the child, the whole family. It's a holistic approach where we're serving the whole family. So
Terry, why don't you go right on ahead and share what the thought that you have, because I think it follows through with the question. Please do.
okay.
Keep going.
Okay, I talked a little bit about comprehensive services around the whole child approach and family support. You know, when I think about education, I mean eligibility and accessibility. So the targeted support for low-income families is families where Head Start is focusing on serving children from low-income households, children with disabilities, and other barriers, ensuring that they have equitable access to early education. There are so many families that would not get the care that they would at a high quality center because many families can't afford, right, to pay for high quality education services. And if you look at what it costs to send a child to an early education center, it's cheaper to send your child to college than it is to an early education center. There are federal standards around accountability. So we have a uniform performance standards where all Head Start and early Head Starts must adhere to federal mandated standards that are consistent with a high level of quality of care and services for all programs nationwide. Our programs, you know, are monitored on a regular basis, on a regular system, and for assessments to ensure that we are in compliance and we're providing that high quality care. I want to talk a little bit about cultural and community adaptation, where um, programs are allowed to adapt specific to cultural and linguistic needs, you know, for the community. So it's important that, whether that's bilingual support or, different things that families need to be successful. Our programs also focus on curriculum and outcomes where the Head Start program is designed for children, for helping them to prepare for kindergarten and develop cognitive, social, and emotional skills, that we are aligned with state's early learning standards to ensure that we are measuring outcomes for all children and families. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about services around one cool thing about the new standards or the new change, this holistic approach around helping families and being more culturally responsive. The families are having issues with food insecurity, housing stability, healthcare access. I talked about the bilingual being culturally responsive, job training, literacy programs, connecting our families to local services to support children with special needs and or disabilities, um, assisting teen parents or single parents around community services or things that's going to help them to be successful in school and life. So I just kind of wanted to share a little bit about some of the things that separate us. And Portia mentioned something that I just wanted to mention. She talked about parents as leaders and advocates. There's a huge cornerstone that I think separates programs, early education and Head Start, in terms we give parents a voice, that we want parents to be actively involved and engaged. For example, at my program, our Parent Policy Council, when I make a new hire or recommendation for a new hire, not only does our board have to approve, but Parent Policy Council must also receive that same recommendation. They have a voice and they get to provide leadership for their children and their families while are enrolled in our programs. And I don't know of any program that allows parents to speak up and to speak out on behalf and advocate for their children in a way that Head Start does. And I think it's a vital program and responsible for this kid in poverty. As I stated, I went to Head Start earlier, and my life would not have taken the trajectory that it has had it not been for a program like Head Start. But thank you, Holly.
Thank you, Terry. One of my favorite things right now on social media is when the National Head Start Association shows a photo of someone like yourself in Head Start leadership and then shows them as an alum. It absolutely that just makes my entire day. So our next question is for Reina Hernandez. And Reina, NAFSCE talks about high impact family engagement. What are examples for our local and state leaders in early learning on how to put this into practice to empower families to be their child's first teachers? And as is stated by the two previous speakers, to be leadership in their child's school?
Absolutely. I think when we talk about high impact family and community engagement, this cuts across the entire continuum, whether it's Head Start, early Head Start, whether it's a pre-K program, first grade, fifth grade, high school. We really think about how the family, school, and community partnership can really support common goals, and think about how, whether we're talking about supporting the well-being and healthy development of students, their academic achievement, their social development, whether we're talking about family outcomes like well-being. One of the things that I love about so Head Start has the parent, family, and community engagement framework, which is it's one of my favorites. We have the dual capacity framework as well, which a lot of times is used in schools around K-12 education. One of the things that I think that the PFCE framework does so well is it looks at outcomes. It looks at child level outcomes, it looks at family level outcomes. And so, it's not just what we sometimes call random acts of family engagement, inviting families for a one-time parent teacher conference or for an open house. Those things are important processes or steps, but family engagement can happen at home. It can happen at the grocery store. It can happen in a school or in a program. And so really thinking about what it is that we're trying to achieve or accomplish, and thinking about families as partners in that process. So, it's very fun. It's a fundamental way of thinking. Portia talked about the how. In a lot of ways, it's the how we get to those things. So, for example, and some of the outcomes you see there, but these apply just as much to K-12. They apply to secondary, thinking about students' learning and development. Well, family and community partnerships can support that. Thinking about the health and well-being of students, family well-being, supporting family transitions, strengthening family and parent-child relationships. All of that can be supported through family partnership. So, for example, supporting learning outcomes and positive relationships. I think sometimes we see less of this, whether you're talking about family literacy or family math. Math is one of the areas that we see a lot of times families may have, complex relationships with math. I know I grew up in a household with one math parent and one I'm not a math person parent, when in fact, math is part of all of our learning and development. And so we have a Center for Family Math at NAFSCE that's really trying to think about how do educators and other folks within the system support families to themselves engage in conversations at home, to be thinking about, it isn't just about activities, but it's about how we talk about the world that surrounds kids so that they think about these things differently. It's about family financial literacy, being too generational and talking about those things early on in different ways. Now, it might look different in high school, but in high school, thinking about that outcomes orientation also matters. So, for example, in Kansas, they have these individual plans of study for college and career planning. And that plan of study is a shared set of outcomes that are a conversation starter for parents, students. They really lend themselves to student-led conversations around where they want to go and what it's going to take for them to get there. And that requires the support of the school. It requires the support of the family. So I think it could look different in different ways. Some of the neat changes, I think, in the Head Start performance standards this time around, there's a big emphasis on mental health supports. I think we all know this. Mental health mattered before the pandemic, but I think the pandemic elevated and highlighted how important mental health, physical health are. A program, whether it's a school, a Head Start center, an early childhood center, they can't be everything for every family, but it can be that central coordinating hub. It can be a pathway to getting what families need, because if a student is struggling with mental health, they are not showing up every day ready to learn and ready to develop. And you see that. And I think we saw a lot of that in particular after the pandemic. So, as we think about all of these different things, I think it applies at every level. At the policy level, this matters too. We talk a lot about how family and community engagement, like there's a policy role. It's very local work, but there is a place to be looking at, how do we create conditions to have these things happen? And how do we think about, when we're thinking about big systemic issues? For example, I've seen a lot of state education agencies now focusing on mental health or on whole child development or on chronic absenteeism. Like these are all really big challenges facing the educational community. Well, I don't know any of those issues that can be dealt with without collaborating with parents and with community. If you're trying to tackle chronic absenteeism, it starts with a conversation about why aren't kids showing up? It's not a truancy officer calling and threatening a family. It's about really understanding what's going on. Is this a transportation issue? Is it is there something else going on? Homelessness sometimes, is it at the cause? And then how do we work through solutions together? And I think that that's the shift. It's not just inviting families occasionally. It's about really understanding that families have assets, communities have assets, schools have assets. No one knows everything and no one is the holder of everything. But when we work together, we're able to provide more of what kids and families need.
Raina, thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. And I would have to say that instead of looking for the fault, it's more looking at solutions and looking at causes versus the how and the why are very important there. So I've got a question for all three of you. And the question that I have is, each of you come from organizations which uplift and model the value of family as first teacher. What is your recommendation to other organizations looking to empower families to be active participants in their child's education and community? And any of you are welcome to take the floor.
All right. If it's okay, I'm gonna go first because I heard what I think Raina answered that kind of at the end of her. I think it's meeting families where they are, number one, and understanding what the families need to be successful. Not necessarily what I need, but what the families need. And every family is unique, right? And I think you build from a strengths-based perspective, and you encourage them to be active participants. And again, it looks different for each family. Again, and really understanding what's important to them and understanding that they see things differently, helping them to understand, talking to them, asking them what they want, not telling them. And what I said, and it's what I believe I experienced when I was a kid in Head Start, that I tell my team, we don't do anything for parents, we do it with them. And I think you have to start there. And I don't like this term of cultural competence. I prefer more around humility, that we support them, we understand them, we want to help guide them. While I understand we honor parents as a first teacher, because we are trying to inform them with the things that we know, the best practices, right? Maybe research or whatever the case may be. But we're trying to make sure they understand and they can receive this information, but also support them. And sometimes it's hand holding, right? It looks different for every family, but just supporting and it's a strength based approach. What I would say. So.
I can go ahead and go next. I think there's a lot, there's a lot that different organizations can do, but I think one thing that for me continues to resonate and be at the heart of so much of this is the idea of building staff capacity to do this work and to be comfortable doing this work, and building structures that support those staff so that it's not all on the person that has family in their job title, or that, it becomes it's like, how can people, we're seeing programming in higher ed that's starting to be more innovative around preparing teachers before they come into the classroom and thinking about ways that we can build more effective field experiences and more connected field experiences early on. And in one of those sites, they're using community schools coordinators, for example, as mentors of those teacher candidates. So they're learning about how communities work. In other places, family liaisons are, supporting, future teachers. So thinking about being creative, but, definitely I think that as we think about building staff capacity, that's just one of the biggest conditions. In those places that use the dual capacity framework, it's one of the two major challenges that's identified there, right? Thinking of the capacity of families and the capacity of educators, where a lot of times, I think in our schools and programs, when they're working well, the capacity of families is often supported by the school staff. So it's almost, you can't get to the one unless you have community-based organizations that are sort of doing this work without really building up staff. So, I think Head Start does this in a lot of ways really well with the relationship-based competencies to support family engagement. But this is true across the board, whether you're, again, a high school, counselor, principal, teacher, elementary, middle school. We had developed at NAFSCE, and I'll drop a link also, or I'll share a link for the chat, family engagement core competencies. And those were a way for us to really cut across all of the continuum and think about, we use the RBCs for Head Start. We looked at the NAEYC standards. We looked at national board standards, different standards that applied to administrators, teachers, and across the board, there were some really important themes that were already, talked about. That includes 8 competencies. This is a tool that people can use, whether you're doing early teacher training, whether you're working with parent liaisons, whether it's in-service training. The first 2 standards are around reflecting. And, as Portia mentioned, you have to understand the context of families. Terry talked about that as well, and it's about really understanding social, political context, funds of knowledge, understanding the strengths that families have, what they're showing up with, negative experiences they may have had with the system beforehand, all of that. We talk about connecting, which is the relationship building area, building relationships with parents, but also with the community organizations that support those same families. We talk about the third big area is collaboration. And so it's co-construction, it's bringing in, Portia mentioned earlier, we need more chairs at the table. What does that look like on instruction? What does that look like? It's not about lesson planning, kind of collaboratively lesson planning every lesson, but it is about understanding what kids are learning, what matters, ways that funds of knowledge they may have that are not being leveraged at times. And then thinking about leading alongside families. Terry talked about the Parent Policy Council and, having those leadership voices, but it's also how do we adjust systems that sometimes often, I think, we're not designed for families to be at the table, because it's not just about having a parent on your advisory. I think Head Start does a great job of making sure that Parent Policy Council, that those members have their capacity built up. So what does it look like as you're doing building that support for them, and if you're at the local level, it's the training of teachers and family liaisons and specialists, but if you're working in other levels like administration, it's embedding this into professional development calendars. If you're working at the systems level, it's about professional standards, accreditation, licensure. It's about thinking about how the different programs, I had seen early state frameworks for whole child support that didn't include families in the framework. And it's like, how do you not include, it's that kind of thinking, whatever the initiative is. You have a state initiative on chronic absenteeism. How is that addressing, sort of, how is family and community partnership a strategy that you're using and embedding in that? And how do we support those transitions? I heard, anecdotally, but so many Head Start families that were deeply engaged in Head Start leadership, deeply engaged, as they transition sometimes into the early years, K-3, and they go, it was a shock to the system. I was not treated the same way. There weren't the same kind of opportunities. I was knocking on the door and no one was opening. We need to shift that. And I do think that training is one of those levers.
Portia, do you have anything to add for us?
Oh, there we are. I was on mute. I hate that when I do that. I have a couple of things to add, but I am in agreement with Terry and Raina. They are talking about this. And I know sometimes people think there's a magic formula. If you just give me these 3 things to do, then then I'll know what to do. Unfortunately, we're working with human development, which is complex, and it is layered by the social determinants, the environment, the community, and all of that. So I have, and I think in Educare too, what I'm trying to say is not, I think I know, we've had to center our work on principles and beliefs, and then begin to design programs, systems, policies based on those principles. And so the first principle is embrace and commit to parent participation and leadership at all levels of your organization, all functions. Or maybe it's just initiative. Maybe you just have an initiative to find out what parents think. Well, don't design the program first. Go to parents and ask them first, how do you think, this is the challenge that we have, how do you think we should look at, and what should we include in discovering solutions or possible solutions to that? So commitment and embrace parent participation and leadership. The other thing is transparency. And I'm saying this, I may be speaking to the professionals, because the parents have told us what they want, either by not showing up, or when they have shown up and told us what they need, we didn't do it. So I know we're better, but I'm just saying that we've got to get even better in partnership. Transparency means that you value the wealth of knowledge and information that parents bring to the table, like you value your professional knowledge. That means that you're not going to tell me something as a professional that is a critical information we need to do to get this, to address this issue, but we're not going to tell the parents. We're not going to, they can't handle it. Wrong. We've got to commit to transparency. That means they've got to have an opportunity to have access to all the information you have as a professional to be successful. They need to know the budget. They need to know what are the critical barriers that you're finding in other families that are preventing them from supporting the education and advocating for their children like they need. You need transparency. The other thing we need is a commitment to representation, meaning that the staff needs to represent and look like who we're serving. The other thing is that representation of parents at every level of your operation, meaning you have to create opportunities to provide information and training so that parents can come and participate fully in your program, in your policy work, or your research work. They need the information. So you have got to allocate resources to support them. You have allocate resources to support your staff. Well, we've got to have resources to support parents' participation, and we value that. The other thing we've got to do is focus on impact. And impact in 2 levels. One is we want to make sure that we are using our best understanding of the practices and where the field is right now. And we want to make sure that parents know that, and we want to make sure that we train our staff to be able to implement those things and strategies in their relationships with families. The other thing we've got to do is we've got to be data driven. We've got to collect the data. We've got to share the data with families, and we've got to continuously improve our services by looking at the data and incorporating and understanding what we're doing well and what is not so well. And we've then got to go back to the table, this partnership table where parents are sitting, and say, here's the challenge. Here's what the data's saying. Here's where we want to go. We're short. We're going short. Now let's think together. what needs to be done to reach those goals. Because see, your parents were at the table when you decided on what the goals were. See, that's important. They've got to be there at the table. So commitment, transparency, representation. And the other thing that parents have told us is that if you really value my information and my lived experience, why can't you create a role for me in your program? If it's so valuable and you're thanking me so much, oh, that's very good information. Then do you have pathways for parents that are interested? Not all parents will be interested in participating at a staff level in supporting other parents in our journey to support all children to be ready for school and to have the necessary academic, social, emotional, and other skills they need to be successful, not only when they enter kindergarten, first grade, and et cetera, but to start on a pathway of successful school trajectory for all children. But anyway, just a little things to think about.
Thank you so much, Portia. I just want to echo what you're saying. My background is in working in programs, mainly on college campuses. And I've done public preschool in several different states. And I always strongly believed in a strong family advisory committee. And what I would do is when I did any hiring, my family advisory committee were on the panel. And they helped me make the decision as to who I hired. Another quick anecdote I'd love to share with all of you is I had the privilege of helping to be a part of the rewriting of the Nebraska Strategic Plan for Early Childhood as a part of the Preschool Development Block Grant. And and our team went across the entire state and had several town hall-like meetings, either virtually or in person. And we asked the questions of families and of educators. And then one of the things that I said we have to do was show them the answers actually being implemented. And we had them actually proof the strategic plan to make sure that their voices were heard and make sure their voices were loud. I'm going to pose a question to Terry, and actually it's less of a question and more of a request. Terry, when we were doing our session prep call, you gave an amazing anecdotal example of a family member in your program who struggled with the transition that Raina was talking about from your program to K-12. Can you share that anecdotal note with our viewers here today?
Absolutely. What I shared during our call was I had a parent to reach out to me. This parent was very engaged and involved during her son's enrollment into the Head Start program. She came to meetings, parent policy council meetings. She also served on the Health Service Advisory Council, and and when we interview staff, as you mentioned, and Portia may have mentioned, she sat on interviews with our team where we would select teachers or staff for our program. And, she felt really happy and engaged. But they transitioned to school system. The child was now in kindergarten. And so this parent reached out to me after transition, wanting to know, hey, what can I do now? Because my son is on his fourth teacher. They don't stay long, something is happening, and I don't know what to do. I sat on interviews at Head Start, but now in the school system, I know nothing about the teachers or the process. And what can I do? And I said, have you spoken to the principal at your school? And she says, I didn't know I could. I said, yes, I want you to go meet with the principal. And if that doesn't work, the next step is you're going to go to the public schools office or ask for a meeting with the superintendent. And she said, Mr. David, what if that doesn't work? And I said, then we're going to help you with your campaign to run for school board. And what was eye-opening for me, and I think sometimes, we always want to know if the school system receiving the child if that child is ready for the school. But my question to the school system is, are you ready for children and families who understands advocacy, who understand leadership, and who are ready to be involved and engaged at a higher level in their children's education? So that's kind of the story. Um, and that's what we do at Head Start. And by helping to empower families, teaching families that you don't just have to be a recipient of the system, you can be a leader. You can it doesn't have to just stop with your child being in the classroom. There's so much a high level of advocacy that you can get involved and leadership. So I think that is very profound that we are training our families in Head Start and early Head Start to have that type of interaction with our system. But unfortunately, sometimes in public schools, and I'm not putting public schools down because we need a good, strong public school system, but we have to find ways to enhance, increase parent leadership and engagement.
Questions in our chat was, how do we get communities more involved in our schools? We're talking about bringing families in. How do we get our surrounding community more involved? And Raina, I'm going to throw this question to you.
Absolutely. Well, I think that we've talked, one of the big themes in all of this has been, parent leadership and partnership and engagement in a variety of different ways. And I do think that one of the ways that we think that can happen, and it starts with leadership being open to engaging in processes. Portia's how is so important. I think you see this embedded and baked into things like the way Head Start operates its local programs, but a lot of times we don't have mechanisms for bringing in family voice, parent voice. So starting with those opportunities that Portia mentioned, what does it look like? I think, for example, during the COVID pandemic, there was a requirement that there be stakeholder engagement as a part of developing plans, rapid response. Why? Because not every community was going through the same thing. And bringing those voices to the table to shape solutions was a way of engaging leadership, but that wasn't necessarily something that systems were used to doing. Some places were, and they were able to respond and react, but others weren't. So between the training of staff, as I mentioned before, the creating some of those tables and spaces that provide leadership opportunities in different ways. Not every parent is going to join a leadership council or a school improvement team or something like that, but it's a strategy, a way. And then creating the support, Portia mentioned this as well. And, it's not enough to just show up at the table. I remember working with the Bilingual Parent Advisory Council members, and we would go through this process, and there were elections, and all of a sudden there was a new president, and there was a new vice president, and there was a new secretary and a new treasurer. And then they'd go, bueno, señora, ¿y ahora qué? Now what? Like, what do I have to do? Right? Like, how do I do this? Right? Like, all of a sudden the focus had just been like, oh, I'm running for this position. And yeah, I've been involved for a few years. And then once they're there, they're like, I don't know how to be the president of an advisor. Like, what are we supposed to be doing? What's our role? What's our job? So providing that support in the various roles. Sometimes it's just showing up to the meeting. Sometimes it's running the meeting, right? Like, those are different levels and they're different skill sets. But, we need to make sure that, people within our system are not only equipped to do that, but it's also part of the charge that we're measuring and monitoring that those things are happening. Portia mentioned that monitoring and evaluation, like, if we don't measure it, sometimes these things just don't happen. We sort of prioritize the things that we have to report or that, that really need, and that doesn't mean to move to a checkbox approach. It means to really meaningfully, value and prioritize these things.
So as we wrap up, I just want to extend any final comments, any final suggestions for our listeners. And Portia, I saw you raise your hand. So
Yes, I raised my hand, but it was a follow-up to what Raina had said. But and it is in a book that I can't remember. It's called The 5 E's. I'll you made me think of it as you were talking, but I can't come to the title right now. But one of those E's in this book by Ioma Iruka and colleagues says that one of our responsibilities as early childhood providers, whether we're policy or program or research, is to demystify the systems that we are so comfortable operating in, the educational system, so that parents can be, I hate to say this, armed and ready so while they're in our programs, before they get to that system, we learned this the hard way from Educare Chicago, because we tracked the children in Educare for 20 years until they entered college. So we knew their teachers, we followed their parents, we asked them and interviewed them. And the first class came back and said to us, excuse me, you didn't prepare me to deal with the school system. How come you guys didn't tell me that, you know, this happens and how it works? So part of our responsibility in building parents' capacity to carry on as the advocate and best advocate and educator, primary educator of their child, is to use the time they're enrolled in our program to build their capacity and give them the opportunity to do that, so that when they're in those systems, they're not confused, like, what does this mean? They already know about it because we've explained it to them. And that's one of the things that I think Educare schools do well, is that we look outside the walls. And part of our family partnership and engagement is to explain and demystify that world of education out there that we and community programs that we have to operate in, professionals all the time, but parents aren't prepared for that. And that's our responsibility to prepare them. When our Educare parents in Chicago enter a school system, we followed up so we know. The principal says, oh yeah, it's the Educare parent. We know they talk like y'all. They talk like you, professional. That's what they say. Oh, some principals say they're troublemakers, but they make good trouble by holding the system accountable. So it is our responsibility, while we have them in that first 5 years of life, is to always prepare them by introducing to them to information about the system in which their children and they are going to operate in, the good and the bad of that, and to even demystify the terms that they use. One of the parents told me in an interview, well, you know, yeah, I was ready for school, for the school system, because I knew Educare's language. I said, what is Educare's? But you know how you guys talk. We got that. So when we say that developmental trajectory to a teacher in a conference, we get better answers than how's my kid doing? You know, so anyway, I'm just saying that that's part of the precious time we have with these families, is to make sure we create experiences, learning experience and opportunities for them to be prepared and understand the strengths and limitation of the system in which their child is going to be in for the next 12 years. And we learned that because we followed the parents. They came back and told us, here's what we need to know to be prepared.
Any final comments, Terry or Raina? Thank you, Portia. Thank you.
I'd just like to say thank you for the opportunity to speak today. It gives me a lot of pleasure to be able to talk about the work that I'm so passionate about, because I too, I can talk about the system because I went through the program and I know what Head Start did in my life, and I'm grateful to have this opportunity and share my experiences. And this is a great topic. Anytime we're talking about empowering families, I want to be a part of it. So thank you for this opportunity, and thanks to all the participants for attending today.
I think for me, also, thank you for inviting us to be a part of today's webinar. And, if anything, the key takeaway in a couple sentences that I'm hoping folks walk away with is that this family and community engagement work is across the continuum, whatever age students, children you're working with. It's at every level, whether you're a practitioner directly working with families, an administrator with supporting the staff and the teachers and others who are working directly with families, and also engaging them in the leadership system, whether you're at the policy level and you're able to create state systems that support this work in different ways. This is an approach. It's the how to education far more broadly. This isn't about, okay, education is happening here, and then we've got these family and community engagement activities that are sort of layered on top and add on. How do we support learning? How do we support student social emotional development? How do we support student mental health and well-being? How do we support math learning? Family and community engagement has to be part of the how. And you just one thing that didn't come up on this call, but I think is so important is, particularly as Head Start goes, those Head Start collaboration offices for anyone working at the systems level are key connectors in being, when I used to do, well, I also worked on a state preschool development grant and an early learning challenge grant, and we were thinking about different state systems. And that collab office was just such a key place to be able to, even though Head Start is federal and runs on its own kind of policy system, there are a lot of ways of integrating, because at the end of the day, it's about supporting the families who are moving through these transitions, and they are that most consistent, sort of central hub for kids, that hub of support.
Portia, any final words for us?
I just appreciate the opportunity. This is a passion for me, and I enjoyed sharing this hour with Terry and Marina. We've got some challenges facing us. Some of them seem to be bigger than they were when I started out in this field. So I just am appreciative of being able to speak to the group and to be in community with all of you as we move forward in trying to change the world and make sure that every child that needs this kind of educational opportunity has an opportunity and a way for his family to access it. I really mean that. The other thing is that maybe, Holly, I don't know if you guys, when you do the follow-up, I'm going to have the name of the book. I'm sorry, with the 5 E's. I can't think of it right now, but I will put it I'll send it to you. And if you do follow-up, you can tell people to look at it, because it definitely talks about what is our role in the opportunity that we have to help prepare parents for outside the walls of our programs as it relates to continuing to be the primary educator and advocate for their child's education. We need to start now while we have them.
Thanks to the three of
Thank you.
Oh, so much. My favorite day of the month is Early Efforts Day, because I get the great privilege of being to talk with so many of our early childhood leaders and people that are making positive change for our children. Next month, on December 2nd at 1 p.m., we will be hosting Holly Alyssa Bruno and Dr. Kate Gallagher. And we will be talking about early educator well-being, and we will also be talking about secondary trauma, which we know many of our early educators and many of our families are currently experiencing and have been experiencing. Thanks to everyone so much for your participation, and I hope everybody has a happy holiday season. Thank you.